In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. Today, we have a gospel, a piece from Christ, warnings and admonitions. It has to do with stumbling. And when the disciples asked, who is the greatest? He asked him to bring the littlest child in the church. So the greatest here is the smallest. So these kids that annoy you, and we call the noise, in the eyes of God, are greater than you. If you're uncomforted by them, you have to think the situation again. So he said, unless you convert and become like them, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. How do you become humble as a child? This is the first piece of this gospel. The second piece is going to be our main talk. But let's just take this one piece and think about it. How do you humble yourself like a child? What's about a child that shows humility? What's in a child that's humble? Children might be actually angry with you. They do. And they can express that by screaming and crying. But what happens a minute later? If it was a man, you would say, this guy has no dignity. Right? If a child comes back smiling at you after 1 minute, if that happens to an older person, you'd say, these people have no dignity, they have no ego, they're nobody. That's it. That's one of the biggest and the smallest and the simplest, gestures of humility. They don't keep an offense. They don't keep an offense. And they don't take it very hard on their ego, because their ego is not that big. And that's part of what God is. How many times we offend God and break His commandments, and the second you come back and say, I'm sorry, what happens? What's expected? The gospel tells us, you're back in the bosom of the Father. There's a very interesting story, the prodigal son. He made a very big offense against his father, but the day he decided to come back, the father welcomed him in open arms. He didn't even ask him what happened to the money. Where's my money? That's a child attitude. God is a great father, but the heart is a heart of a child, not the understanding. Don't belittle God, not the strength, not the wisdom, which is a very interesting irony. God is the wisest and the most humble. In His actions, sometimes we project ourselves on God, and this is we do ourselves great injustice. We say, if I am in God's place, I would spit in my face right now. I don't think He wants to see me. That's not the case at all. So He wants us to be His children by being likewise. It's a great struggle, but it's worth it. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Then He says also, whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me. So if anybody comes in Jesus' name, anybody who's called a Christian, we ought to honor and respect even little children, and don't disrespect anyone, especially those who are called by the name of Christ. Then He turns into the other side, and let us talk about this a little bit. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him or her if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned or she were drowned in the depths of the sea. He here is a general term, it's not really specifically to men. Woe to the world because of offenses. For offenses must come, He says, but woe to that man by whom the offense comes. Why does it have to come through men? Why can't the offenses not just come without humans? That's an important question. Let's start with that. Why did Jesus have to come from heaven and be incarnated and be in the flesh? It's the same reason as why did the devil use the serpent in the garden to tempt Eve? Why didn't the devil speak to Eve directly? Very simple, because both heaven and hell are fighting over us, using us to get each other. They're gonna have to be a human being who causes us to sin, and a human being that causes us to be saved. This is it. The whole battle is right there. The whole battle is right there. And sometimes you are tempted to be an agent of heaven. Not tempted, actually, enticed and encouraged to be an agent of heaven, where Christ whispered through the Holy Spirit, let's do something for the kingdom. Let us help others to come closer. And you can have the same enticement. Let us make people sin. And without knowing it, we get involved in this. Sometimes we know it, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we are oblivious to the power using us, and sometimes very clear about it. Let's get into some data. They say there is a group, that does statistics. It's a very interesting group, started doing this from the 90s. They call the Barna, not the Barna. I'm thinking they're Italian too. So the Barna group has statistics about churches. They go and do statistics in churches. And in 2016, they came up with this new statistics. They said 41% of all the men in churches, Christian men, watch pornography on a regular basis. 41%. And they tried to find out why this is the case. They said since cell phone came out, and parents have been handing cell phones to their kids at age 10, kids got addicted. Because at age 10, when there's no monitoring, there's no guidance, and they have a freedom to look on the internet, they got addicted. Who is the stumbling block in this? Tell me. Who is the stumbling block? Here you find out, stumbling block doesn't have to be actually aggressive. It doesn't need to be molestation and sexual abuse. It can be only ignorance. So we actually can be a stumbling block actively, or can be a stumbling block also passively. So people get addicted to things because the parents are not watching. The caregiver are not thinking. They want to please their kids, and that's it. But also on the other side, and I don't want to skip this, and every year I come to this gospel, I speak about it. Don't leave your little kids with anyone. Period. Not an uncle, not a grandfather, no. You have to be clear, very clear about what can be done. And if there's going to be a babysitter, you're going to have a camera at home. Ultimately, it's your responsibility. Don't accept a visitor to sleep in the same room with your kids. Nor allow that to happen. Don't let your kids go and be alone somewhere else until they are, I would say, until they are 18. I would say this is very important. And I keep saying this because we have naive parents and naive families who think their family is safe, or their relatives are safe, or their friends are okay. Not at all. Temptation will come because it's not the friends, it's not the family. It is the spirit who wants to use this friend, a very evil spirit, and wants to destroy a child. Another study says, very big number, very big, I don't remember the ratio, of homosexual boys, there was down boys, maybe 60, 70% of them were abused when they were little. It's ridiculous. And the culture we live in wants to make this, I'll tell you something very actually astonishing. At one point, the American Society of Psychologists, because it was very overwhelming and they want to make homosexuality normal, they said abusing boys is good. There was a published study, and one person was fighting for this and said, this is crazy, what are you doing? They kept nagging them, and even to the degree of going to the law, and they revoked that study, maybe 5 years after they made it a published, accepted study. Just, I want you to think about culture, and where the spirit of the culture is going. Who is guiding this culture? Where is it going? So, please be careful with your kids. If you are responsible for a child, underage, in whatever stage they are, be extremely vigilant and watchful what and how you can teach it, actively and passively. Great blessing. John is coming to the church today. This is beautiful. Hi, John. Thank God for your health. So that's what I would say. Be extremely vigilant. There is no way you can actually be comfortable in the time we live in more than anything else. How does temptation happen? See, that the serpent by itself is not really I think you think of it, the serpent was possessed. Who speaks through the serpent was not the serpent, it was the devil. Very simple. The devil was speaking through the serpent. And you can say, we should have killed that serpent. The elephant maybe should stomp the serpent as it was tempting Eve, so we can keep the innocence of Eve. Maybe, who knows? That's how the devil uses other people, weak people, to get to innocent people, the people of God. He wants you and he wants me. And if you think about it at any point of time, you can be, as you're thinking about it, you are careful to watch your thoughts. You can be an agent of heaven or an agent of hell. Many things we can do, and many things we can not do will either hurt or benefit someone else. Lead them to God, to life, or lead them to hell and death. What does temptation look like when it happens? They say temptation goes through stages. Some people say 6 stages. I remember at least the first 3. The first thing that happens in temptation is distraction, misdirection, distraction. Have you ever watched pocketers or pickers? We watch them doing it. So in the bus, if you're standing in a very busy bus, you find somebody kicking you in the leg repeatedly. Not very hard, but then you look at him and say, what's going on, man? What are you doing? By the time you say that, your wallet is snatched. That's how the devil does it. So they distract you. Listen to what the devil did with Eve, and it's the same thing with us. They get us distracted from the main topics. Did God really say not to eat from all the trees in the garden? This is a distraction. Let her think about something totally different. And then the second piece is the enticement. How about this? As you are distracted and you're away from the main topic, your heart is not really centered in it. You are given an enticement, something very nice. And then you go into the meditation. Once the enticement is offered, the mind goes into imagining things. What can it be? How does it feel to have this? Images, thoughts, all kinds of things come. And then the battle. What is in the battle number 4? Not do it, do it. You have voice that says don't do it. And you have a voice that says do it, it's good for you. Did you see? And then after that, number 5 would be either victory or loss. Our window in this time of fighting comes to the battle. After, if you let the battle go forever, then you're going to lose, no matter what you do. Then we have to run away. Problem with this is when you have too many things happening at the same time. You have voices, you have images, you have thoughts, and you're bombarded from everywhere. Do you think can we engage with that? Especially if you're a little child. You're still innocent and have no idea how the world functions. And all of a sudden you find something to you that is very interesting and exciting. This is what the world does, and we should have to think about it. So what questions should I ask myself when temptation? I'm talking about temptation now. When a temptation comes to me first, and what should I do to protect the little ones? And not to be an offense to anybody. So I will advise something like this. First of all, be extremely careful what you give to your children and when to give it to them. At the age of 10, when you give an iPhone or iPad, or even before that, at the age of 5, do you think they have any power to fight anything? No, they don't understand anything. And once they get access to pornography, they did this study. Once they get access to pornography, they're not going to do it infrequently, but they will do it regularly. It becomes habitual, it becomes an addiction. And that's it. You've destroyed that person's self-image forever. Because once a person is in the temptation, they have a choice, either to remain pure and holy, or to enjoy this thing. And then what? If the enjoyment and the pleasure takes over, they lose their self-respect. They lose themselves. They don't really think of themselves as anything important or valuable. And they give up. They give up. And that's it. Then what? Don't think it's something simple. It's actually not as equal as, but very close to sexual abuse. Because in the mind of the child, they tell you, the addiction specialists, they say, there is a wiring that happens. There is a chemistry that's released, and it becomes physical. It's very close to be addicted to heroin. They said there's not much difference between addiction to pornography and addiction to heroin. So this is something to think about as Coptic Orthodox, who we claim to be the people of God, who belong not to earth but to heaven. To be a stumbling block passively, what else? When we omit things, I'm not being a role model. What child looks at me and sees me, if he sees Abuna looking at his phone non-stop, or social media non-stop, or TV non-stop, or stock market non-stop, guess what he would think? What would he think? It is important to do these things, but Baba or Mama or Abuna doesn't go to church, he doesn't take communion, he doesn't care to confess, he doesn't care to read the Bible, he doesn't care to pray. Then most probably as a young child, that's a very strong stumbling that we don't really appreciate. I value things and make it very high, and I devalue things and make it very low. You think this is not a stumbling block? Please think again. Who's going to teach the kid to pray? When I was young, God rest the soul of my father, I don't remember my father much. I'm the oldest, but I don't remember much about him physically. But I remember a couple of times when I saw him standing with his akbeya and praying the night prayer before he goes to sleep. I remember that vividly. Something to remember. What would your child remember you as? What would your child remember you as? Stumbling, it can come in many forms. Please, today, the gospel is giving us a chance to think about what we are doing. As friends, how you deal with your friends. As a church members, when a girl comes to church and her mother had told her to put on the most expensive cloth, and then the boy also put on brand names and come to church, and the poor members of the church look at them, what would they feel like? The church is like a catwalk, right? A parade of clothing. And we have to have that, otherwise we're not good enough. Or when a girl puts on revealing clothes, she comes up with a micro skirt, and her legs are all open. And then she thinks she's being remarkable. She made an achievement. What's happening? She has no idea that there is a boy in the church that will look her up and examine her body and lust after her. And she became in that day not a queen, she became the agent of hell. There is a lot that we need to think about and examine everything you do and see in which way I'm actually a stumbling block, in which way the devil is using me. And I'm going to tell you something, the devil uses us by focusing our attention on ourselves. And it's me and only me. I'm going to get what I want. I'm going to do what I want. Forget the others. I don't care. That's how it is said. That's how it is always put. It is about me. What ends up happening is we end up miserable because we lose grace. We have nothing to do with heaven. There's nothing given to us. And everything we have is lost. We end up being depressed, sad, anxious, competitive, always wanting to impress, always wanting things that it doesn't satisfy us, and we end up in a bad place, very bad place. Instead of having to be agents of heaven, I will tell you something. If you give the others something heavenly, God is very aware of it. If you give 1%, He gives you 10% to replace. Heaven says, there's someone working for us, and it's a vendor of grace. You think the manufacturer or the supply house will stop sending goods to a vendor that's very active? Of course not. I make sure that I have enough stock of things for people who are selling it or giving it. Same way the devil. He sees somebody vending, he's giving out his goodies. What the devil does? Give more of his goodies. If the heaven sees that you're a vendor for heaven, what does the storehouse in heaven do? Prepare more for this person because he is doing our job. Let us think about this today and let's be serious about it. It's part of this watchfulness. I'm watching for myself and from those who God entrusted me with to make sure they don't get stumbled, they don't get ruined. I don't want that because it's a big thing. Remember that I'm going to end this with this warning. It says, it's better for that person if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea, killed. It's better for him to be killed than to continue doing this. And he's going to the same radicality and the same aggressiveness. He says, if your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off. Cut it off, meaning what? Be very aggressive with the stumbling. You have a friend that's causing you to stumble. Think about it. What should you do? And you know for sure this friend is not a good friend. He's giving you a hard time to continue to be with God. What should you do? If you have a device that's always bad coming out of it, what should you do? He's saying a millstone to be hung around the neck, and an hand to be cut, an eye to be plucked. What does that mean? God doesn't want us to be blind, lame. No, He doesn't want us to be this. But if it is a gadget, is it easier to pluck my eye or take off the gadget? It's easier to throw myself in the water with a millstone or cut off a friend. I remember in many cases, some of the people, the good people in the church, had told me this. Abuna, I have a friend who's not very good. I'm giving them a warning. If they don't stop enticing me and talking to me about these things, I'm going to have to cut it off with them. That was serious. I looked at them and I admired them and I thought, these are people of God. These are really people of God. They're not going to play around with their life, with their relationship with Christ, and they are on the side of Christ, not on the side of Satan. I ask Christ to give me protection and to protect our kids and to lead us all to heaven and to protect us from the evil one and to keep the stumbling away from us and give us the wisdom to discern what is really the source of stumbling for us and for our kids. To whom is the glory, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and forever.